Welcome to Crimson Secrets. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We read every single one. Now settle in, because this one is going to make your jaw drop. The moment Vivian Ashworth walked into the boardroom that Thursday morning, she already knew. Not because anyone told her, not because she'd a receipt, a text message, a hotel key tucked into the wrong coat pocket. She knew the way a person knows a storm is coming before a single cloud appears. Something in the air had changed, and a woman who had spent 22 years building a company from a rented office with secondhand furniture and a phone that barely worked knows when the ground beneath her is no longer solid. She set her coffee on the table, sat down, smiled at the assembled faces around the glass-topped conference table. Faces she had hired, promoted, trusted. Then she opened her laptop and began the quarterly review meeting as if nothing in the world was wrong. Because that was what Vivian Ashworth did. She didn't react. She planned. 38 years old, the founder and majority stakeholder of Ashworth Capital Group, a private equity firm managing close to $2 billion in assets, Vivian had spent the better part of her adult life being underestimated. She had started the company at 26 with $140,000. She'd borrowed against her grandmother's house in Columbus, Ohio. She had worked through a miscarriage alone because she couldn't afford to pause. She had shaken hands with men who looked past her shoulder to find the person actually in charge, then quietly outmaneuvered every single one of them in the deal that followed. She was not a woman who panicked. Her husband, Elliot Ashworth, was the company's chief operating officer. A role she had created for him 7 years ago when they married, because she believed in him, or both she did, which in hindsight may have been the most expensive mistake of her career. He was charming and handsome in the kind of way that photographs well, and he had a gift for making people feel seen, which in the finance world was genuinely useful. She had loved him for it. She still wasn't sure she didn't. But 3 weeks ago, during a routine internal audit, she'd ordered because their Luxembourg subsidiary had shown an anomaly too small for most people to notice. Her head of compliance, a quiet and meticulous woman named Agatha, had brought her a folder and placed it on her desk without a word. Vivian had read it twice. Then she had closed it, thanked Agatha, and told her to share it with no one. Then she had sat at her desk for a long time, without moving. The folder contained wire transfer records. 14 of them, over 18 months, routed through 3 shell companies that had been registered quietly and without her knowledge. 2 in Delaware, 1 in the Cayman Islands. The total amount moved $4,312,000. Ashworth Capital Funds, her money, the company she had built with her hands and her grandmother's house, and years she would never get back. And the accounts receiving those transfers? Registered in the name of a woman called Brenna Cole. Vivian had looked up Brenna Cole within the hour. 27 years. A junior associate Elliot had hired 8 months ago into the business development division. Her LinkedIn photo showed a woman who was pretty in an uncomplicated way, bright smile, efficient blazer. The kind of face that made people think of possibility. The kind of face Vivian recognized, not because she'd ever seen it before, but because she understood immediately what it meant. She did not call her attorney that night. She did not confront Elliot. She poured herself a single glass of Bordeaux from the rack in the kitchen. The 2011 Pomerol she'd been saving for their 10th anniversary, 18 months away. And she drank it slowly, standing at the kitchen window, watching the lights of Chicago spread out 32 floors below her. Then she started making a list. The annual leadership summit was Vivian's invention. She had launched it 6 years ago as a way to bring together Ashworth Capital's top partners, clients, and key stakeholders for 2 days of presentations, dinners, and the kind of conversation that only happened when the right people were in the same room. It was held every year at the Langmore Hotel, a converted historic building in the River North neighborhood that had the particular quality of making everyone inside it feel as though they were participating in something significant. This year's summit was 4 weeks away when Vivian found the folder. She spent those 4 weeks carefully. She brought in an outside forensic accounting firm, not the one, Ashworth Capital, used for routine audits, but a different one based in Boston, whose senior partner owed her a favor from a deal she had quietly saved him from in 2019. She told them she needed a full trace on the 14 transfers, every subsidiary account, every layer of corporate structure. She wanted a complete picture, and she wanted it airtight. She met with her personal attorney, not the firm's corporate counsel, and had a very quiet conversation in his office on a Saturday morning that lasted 2 hours. She had lunch with 3 of Ashworth Capital's 5 founding limited partners, the investors who had believed in her at 26 and whose loyalty was to her specifically, not to the institution Elliot now co-occupied. Each lunch was separate. Each conversation covered different things, but circled back to the same quiet point. Vivian was thinking about certain structural changes to the company's governance. She wanted their input. Their input was warm and unambiguous. And at the office, she did what she always did. She attended meetings. She reviewed deals. She asked Elliot about his day and listened to him answer. She watched him very carefully, in the way you watch a person when you already know the end of the sentence they're speaking, nodding along, giving nothing away, cataloging everything. What she noticed, watching him now with different eyes, was how comfortable he had become. There was a looseness in him she hadn't seen before or hadn't noticed. A man who had gotten away with something long enough to have stopped bracing for consequences. He was sleeping well, he was laughing easily. He brought her flowers once out of nowhere, pink peonies from a florist on Michigan Avenue, and she'd put them in a vase on the kitchen counter and thanked him and thought, "You are so sure I don't know." That certainty of his was going to cost him everything. The night before the summit, Vivian received the final report from the Boston forensic team. She read it in her home office, with the door closed, making margin notes in her careful handwriting. When she finished, she sat for a moment. Then she called Agatha. "It's done," she said. "And?" Agatha said. "It's enough," Vivian said. "It's more than enough." There was a silence on the line. "Are you all right?" Agatha asked. Vivian looked at the stack of documents in front of her. $4 million, 18 months, a man she had married, sleeping 20 feet down the hall. "I will be," she said. "By tomorrow night I will be." The Langmore Hotel on the first evening of the summit was precisely what it was every year. Luminous. The main ballroom had been dressed in deep navy and gold, the color palette Vivian had chosen herself because she had always believed that the right environment shaped the quality of thinking in a room. There were 340 guests, 12 tables. An open bar that Vivian had deliberately specified should not be too generous. She wanted people clear-headed. She wore midnight blue, not her usual choice. She typically favored charcoal or deep burgundy at company events, colors that read as authoritative without being aggressive. But tonight she had chosen the dress she'd bought in Paris 2 years ago and never worn, a floor-length silk crepe with a structured shoulder and a neckline that was elegant but not performative. She had looked at herself in the mirror before leaving the suite and thought, "Yes, this is right." Elliot had said, "You look incredible," in the elevator down, and she had smiled and said, "Thank you," and watched the numbers drop. Brenna Cole was in the room. Vivian had expected that. Elliot had included her in the summit invitation list as part of the business development team, which was perfectly reasonable on paper. Vivian had approved the attendee list herself, including Brenna's name, without a flicker of expression. She spotted her within the first 10 minutes. Young woman in a champagne-colored dress near the bar, laughing a little too brightly at something. The particular brightness of someone who knows they're somewhere they're not quite supposed to be, and is working harder than necessary to seem at ease. She was wearing a piece of jewelry that caught the light, a bracelet, wide and gold, with a heavy vintage quality to it. Vivian recognized it immediately. It was the Ashworth cuff, a gold statement piece that had been featured in a Vogue profile of Vivian 5 years ago. An antique, early 20th century, acquired by Vivian at an estate auction in London for just over $90,000. It lived in the safe in her home office, the safe that Vivian controlled, or that Vivian had thought she controlled. She understood, in that instant, that Elliot had given it to her. She didn't know how. She would piece that together later, When she learned that Elliot had photographed the safe combination years ago, casually during a morning when Vivian was traveling, and had simply filed it away, the way people file away insurance. She had never thought to change it. Why would she? She had trusted him. She stood very still for a moment. 300 guests around her, music playing, glasses clinking, her company's name on every placard and banner in the room. She took a breath, set down her wine glass, smoothed the front of her dress. Then she walked toward the bar. She didn't approach Brenna directly. She stopped a few feet away to speak with one of the founding limited partners, a warm and measured man named George Holt, who had known her since she was 26 and had never once doubted her. Their conversation was natural, easy. She laughed at something he said, and then, as though it had occurred to her only in passing, she turned slightly and said to Brenna, who was standing close enough, "That's a beautiful bracelet." Brenna turned, smiled, polished, practiced. "Thank you so much. May I?" Vivian gestured. Brenna extended her wrist. Vivian looked at the piece with the expression of someone admiring a stranger's jewelry. She turned Brenna's wrist just slightly, enough to see the interior of the cuff, the maker's mark, the hallmark, the small engraved initials that Vivian had added herself at a jeweler on Bond Street. V.A. 1923. "Stunning piece," Vivian said, releasing her wrist. "Enjoy the evening." She walked away, found the nearest server, asked for still water. Her hands were not shaking. She was very proud of that. At 9:15, Vivian stepped to the front of the room and called the dinner to order. She welcomed 340 people with the particular warmth she had perfected over 22 years of speaking in rooms that didn't necessarily want to listen to her. The warmth that was real, not performed, because she genuinely cared about the people in this room, or most of them. Then she made her announcement. "I want to take a moment to share something with all of you, because you are the people who matter most to this company. Over the past month, Ashworth Capital has completed an extensive internal and external audit of our financial operations. In the course of that review, our team, along with an outside forensic accounting firm, identified a series of unauthorized transfers totaling $4,312,000 moved from company accounts over the past 18 months through 3 shell entities." The room went very quiet. "I want to be clear," she continued. "This matter has been fully documented, and the findings have been delivered to federal authorities. The individuals involved are known. The process is underway." She paused. Let the silence exist. "I am telling you this tonight not to cause alarm, but because transparency with our partners has always been the foundation of what we do here. You deserve to know. The company is sound. The company is protected. And the people responsible for this will be held fully accountable." She did not look at Elliot. She didn't need to, but she heard, from the left side of the room near table 7, the sound of a chair being pushed back. What happened next, Vivian had not fully planned, but she had prepared for. Elliot stood up. His face was doing something complicated that she had never seen it do before. A kind of collapsing, the expression of a man watching the floor open under him. He said her name. "Vivian, Mr. Ashworth," she said quietly, and the microphone was still on, and 340 people heard her use his surname and understood immediately what that meant. "I think we should let the evening continue." He sat back down. Across the room she saw Brenna Cole set her glass on the table. The champagne-colored dress had lost its brightness. She was looking at the bracelet on her wrist. George Holt, at the table to Vivian's right, started to applaud slowly. Then the table next to him. Then the next. By the time Vivian stepped back from the microphone, the room was on its feet. She had arranged everything in advance with a composure that, looking back, probably should have concerned her, but didn't. The attorneys had filed the initial civil complaint 2 days before the summit. The documentation package, the forensic report, the wire transfer records, the shell company registrations, the photo Agatha had found on Elliot's personal cloud backup of him, photographing the safe combination on a Tuesday morning, in March of the previous year, had been delivered to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division the week prior. The bracelet was a detail she hadn't anticipated, but it was, in its way, perfect. $90,000 of her own property, worn on the wrist of a 27-year-old woman at Vivian's own company event. It was the kind of detail that made the story complete, in a way that all the wire transfer records in the world couldn't quite achieve, because numbers were abstract, and a piece of jewelry on the wrong wrist was something everyone in the room could see and understand in an instant. She hadn't orchestrated it. He had given her that for free. In the days that followed, she would retrieve the cuff through her attorney as part of the civil proceedings. Brenna, to her credit, surrendered it without argument. The young woman had, it emerged, known about the transfers for some time, had accepted Elliott's explanation that the money was his to move and the companies were legitimate holding entities, had chosen to believe it because believing it was easier and more convenient than the alternative. She hadn't been charged. Vivian had declined to pursue that avenue. That was not mercy exactly. It was a different kind of calculation. She had enough. Elliott was a different matter. Civil proceeding first for the full amount plus damages. The federal case would take longer. His attorneys had already been in contact. The morning after the summit, Vivian sat alone at the table in her suite at the Langmore, with a cup of coffee going cold and the skyline of Chicago in front of her and a stack of emails she wasn't reading. She had slept 4 hours. She felt oddly calm. Not the calm of resolution, not yet, but the calm of having done what needed doing, of having stood in a room of the people who mattered and told them the truth, and of having watched the truth land. Her phone was full of messages. From partners, from clients, from journalists. She would not be calling back. From her mother, who lived in Columbus and had seen something on the news. From 3 women she had been friends with for 15 years, all of whom said versions of the same thing. We knew something was wrong. We didn't want... We should have said. She answered her mother first, short. Honest. I'm okay. I'll call you this weekend, I promise. She let herself do that for a few minutes, because she wasn't the kind of person who pretended the feeling wasn't there. She had loved. She still wasn't entirely sure she didn't, or didn't love some version of him, the version that had existed or that she had believed existed, which might amount to the same thing. It was possible to mourn someone who was still alive. It was possible to grieve a marriage even when leaving it was the right and only thing. She had given him years. She had given him a title and a platform and access to the machinery she had built with her hands. And he had used all of it carefully over 18 months to take from her the thing he believed she would be too proud, or too busy, or too trusting to notice. He had not known her at all. At 10 o'clock, Agatha knocked and let herself in with a key card. Vivian had left at the front desk. She set a fresh coffee on the table, sat down across from Vivian and looked at her for a moment. Well? Agatha said. Well, Vivian agreed. The summary coverage is? Agatha began. I know, Vivian said. I'll read it later. Agatha nodded. She was 51, methodical, without sentimentality, and she had been Vivian's head of compliance years. She had brought the folder, without hesitation, and said nothing to anyone and waited, for 3 weeks, without once asking Vivian what she planned to do with it. Vivian appreciated that in a way she didn't have the exact words for. The Boston team submitted their final invoice, Agatha said. Pay it, Vivian said. Already done. Vivian looked out at the city. What does the firm need from me this week? The Hudson deal needs a decision by Friday. The Meridian partners want to reschedule the Q3 call, and the board wants to do a statement. I'll draft the statement today, Vivian said. The Hudson decision I can do by Wednesday. Tell Meridian Thursday works. Agatha made a note, then she looked up. You're going to be all right. It wasn't a question. Vivian picked up the cold coffee and took a sip anyway. I built this company once, she said. I can do whatever needs doing. Outside, 32 floors down, Chicago was going about its morning, trucks and pedestrians, and the distant blue of Lake Michigan, catching the early light in the way it always did, indifferent and steady and beautiful. Vivian set down the cup, opened her laptop, and started to work. That evening, alone in the suite, she opened the wall safe she'd had installed in the Langmore at her own request years ago. A quirk, a habit, she'd never been able to entirely explain. Inside was a small velvet pouch. She opened it and took out what was inside. A single earring, one of a pair that had belonged to her grandmother. The other was lost, had been lost since Vivian was 8 years old, on a day she only half remembered now. She had kept the remaining one anyway. She held it in her palm for a moment. She thought about her grandmother's house in Columbus, the 140,000. The second-hand office and the phone that barely worked, and the men who looked past her shoulder. She thought about what it had cost to get here, and what it was going to cost going forward, and decided, not for the first time, not as a revelation, but as a quiet restatement of something. She had always known that the cost was worth it, that she was worth it. She put the earring back, closed the safe, pressed the lock. The combination was hers alone, and tomorrow she would change it to something no one else would ever know.